I was freaking pumped to see this post from 32 beat writers, essentially outlaying the new lines DraftKings just put out to essentially predict where the biggest movers will be this offseason. We're going to be looking at Russell Wilson, Justin Fields, Kirk Cousins, Saquon Barkley, Derrick Henry, Josh Jacobs, Mike Evans, Higgins, Stefon Diggs, and seeing the most likely teams that they'll be playing for in 2024. Now, first guy up on this list is going to be Russell Wilson, where Russell Wilson right now has actually his most likely team to be the Atlanta Falcons. This is at plus 120. So you can say it's, I don't want to say 50-50, but pretty damn close. I mean, this would make so much sense for Atlanta as well. I mean, you're in an interesting spot, right? Where the Atlanta Falcons were good enough where they are not in the mix to go out there and get Caleb Williams. They're not in the mix to get Drake May. They would have to trade up to get one of the big three quarterbacks this year. Maybe Jaden Daniels. I have no idea. But you're most likely not getting a valuable quarterback in the NFL draft. New coach coming in probably wants to win right away. So if you were looking at the kind of investment you want to make into a quarterback, your options are either draft a player like Bo Nix, Michael Penix in the second round, send up a prayer that somehow they turn into something and you're not just stuck with another Desmond Ridder, or go out there and get Russell Wilson. This would be beautiful for the value of both Kyle Pitts and Drake London. I want to throw in Bijan Robinson on that list as well. Obviously, Russell Wilson is not the same player he once was. Russell Wilson is not a top 10 NFL quarterback, probably not even a top 20 NFL quarterback, but compared to the options that they would have in the second round of this year's NFL draft, compared to what they've had over the past few seasons, I would be confident to say that Russell Wilson would probably be one of the best possibilities if you are a Drake London, Bijan Robinson, or Kyle Pitts owner in Dynasty. Now, the second most likely team is actually a tie between two. You have the Denver Broncos as well as the Las Vegas Raiders. Would be interesting to see him stay in division. I mean, going over to Las Vegas makes sense on a couple of different things. One, you got no state income tax. Obviously, that matters a little bit if you're making this much money. Two, pretty good stadium. Also, it really just comes down to what you're expecting with the player coach here. I mean, if Davante Adams stays, maybe Russ decides, okay, let's go. Let's see what. I just don't necessarily see the Raiders having a viable plan to try to bring in a veteran quarterback to win in the short term, where you have Mahomes in your division. You have Justin Herbert with a real coach in your division as well. Whereas like the Falcons, at least in my mind, make a lot more sense because that is a winnable division. And if you're bringing in Russ, obviously it's not a long-term play. And then the last team here would be the Washington Commanders plus 640. So by no means likely for Russ to go to Washington. Would be interesting. I'm assuming that that would mean that they go ahead and take Marvin Harrison Jr. at 2 or maybe trade back entirely. I doubt that happens. Really, if you're looking at Russ, there are 3 teams that he's being priced in to potentially go to, which would be the Falcons, Broncos, and Raiders. Now, moving over to our next quarterback, I was surprised to see Justin Fields only plus 100 to stay in Chicago. I have essentially been operating under the assumption that Caleb Williams will be a Chicago Bear this next season. Obviously, there are the reports coming out saying, oh, Caleb doesn't want to go to Chicago. He's saying he won't play for the Bears. He's telling him they have to trade the pick. I have no idea how true that is. We hear these NFL draft rumors every single offseason that a lot of times they turn out to be nothing. But maybe Caleb really does not want to be a Chicago Bear. Maybe he is going to force a trade here and have Washington move up to 1 and Justin Fields ends up staying in Chicago. Now, if you're looking at the other options, really there's only one team that looks interested. Atlanta Falcons at plus 140. I mean, with Atlanta would be a good landing spot for Justin Fields himself, with Justin Fields getting the weapons of Drake London, Kyle Pitts, and Bijan Robinson. With the new coaching staff in here where you don't have to deal with Arthur Smith, it would be phenomenal from a Justin Fields fantasy perspective, where Justin Fields obviously has a ton of rushing upside and could put up a ton of fantasy points himself. Now, what would that do to Drake London? What would that do to Kyle Pitts? It would be very bad for those two players. While I understand maybe you want to make the argument that Justin Fields is a better real-life quarterback than Russell Wilson at this point of their respective careers, there's a big difference between just talent and actually providing volume in the passing game. Obviously with Fields, he's had the Chicago Bears being the worst passing offense in the NFL over the past 3 seasons. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that obviously he's going to be monopolizing a lot of these points on the ground for himself. But it would be great for Fields, just bad for everybody else here. Going over to Las Vegas, this would be really interesting here. I think that you actually have the Raiders, in my mind, as a landing spot that makes more sense for Fields than what would for Russell Wilson, because Justin Fields going into his next team, I am viewing it as essentially a make or break season for Justin Fields. We're going to get to see what Justin Fields looks like in a good situation outside of Chicago. Fields has been very bad from an objective perspective over the past 4 seasons. A lot of people want to make the argument that it's due to how bad the situation was in Chicago, which is a completely fair point. And if he ended up going to San Francisco, I'm sure that he would have had significantly more success than he's had otherwise. But still, nonetheless, objectively speaking, the results have been bad over the past 4 years. I do believe that this next team is a make or break. You invest into Justin Fields with a day 2 pick. You essentially see, okay, is this our future guy? And he has upside to be that future guy, depending on how 2024 goes. But you could always move on for 2025. So I think it makes a lot of sense for the Raiders if you want to try to find that long-term quarterback at a cheaper price as well, where we know the Raiders also are a team that aren't in the running for a top 3 QB this year. Now you have Seattle plus 750. Would be interesting. Would be really bad for JSN, really bad for DK Metcalf, but would be great for Justin Fields. Now going over to our next quarterback, this is the guy that you want. Kirk Cousins is a quarterback that may not be a phenomenal QB where you're super excited to see him take your team to the Super Bowl, but nonetheless, Cousins is someone you want for your wide receivers in fantasy. He's going to be at the top of the NFL pretty much every year with passing volume. He's that pocket passing option where he's not monopolizing any of the points on the ground for himself. Right now, he's minus 200 to go to Minnesota. So yeah, I think that you can pretty much pencil him to be a Minnesota Viking this next season. Plus 300 to go to Atlanta, plus 650 to go to Washington, plus 800 to go to Las Vegas. But Kirk Cousins is the guy that you want if you are a Jordan Addison dynasty owner, if you are a Drake London dynasty owner, if you are a Terry McLaurin dynasty owner. This is who you want to provide you passing volume. Now, going over to the running backs here, that'll be interesting. Saquon Barkley, I would say, is the most premium running back on the market. Obviously, Barkley gives you the usage as a receiver. Plus, Barkley is incredibly young. I understand that he's been on the radar. We've been talking about the guy forever. Only drafted in 2018, right? Drafted the year after of someone like CMC, Aaron Jones, Alvin Kamara, Austin Eckler. So he's a lot younger than someone like Derrick Henry, who was drafted 2 years prior. But nonetheless, he is minus 150 to go back to the Giants this next season. He's plus 220 to go to Houston, plus 500 to go to the Chargers. And then outside of that, everybody else in long shots. The best team is Philly, plus 1,600. But these 3 landing spots, obviously, you'd be hoping that he finds himself in Los Angeles. He finds himself in Houston. I think Houston would make so much sense, where we have seen time and time again that these teams, when you have that quarterback on a rookie deal, you kind of want to go all in and win right now. You give Saquon Barkley a deal that has 2 years of guaranteed money. He's off your books by the time you have to go through and extend CJ Stroud. I would love to see Saquon Barkley in Houston, but Los Angeles obviously would be great. New coaching staff coming in, Eckler presumably on the way out, and obviously an elite level quarterback as well. Now going over to our next guy, Derrick Henry is a complete wild card. You have no idea where Derrick Henry is going to go. Right now, plus 350 to go to Philly, plus 350 to go to Baltimore, plus 450 to go to Houston, and plus 550 to go to Dallas. If I'm looking at this, what we have typically seen is we've seen a lot of these key free agents stay in division. I don't necessarily know if this is the opposing teams had a plan to go up against them twice a year. They're very familiar with the player and they feel very comfortable to bring him in. I think that Derrick Henry would make a lot of sense for the Texans for the similar reasons that we mentioned with Saquon Barkley. I think Henry is just a much lesser version at this point, considering the fact that he was drafted 2 years prior. And keep in mind, Derrick Henry was a little bit older coming out of Alabama. So Derrick Henry is a very old running back, a lot of tread on the tires, but I don't know. This is still a running back that's going to be a lot better than Devin Singletary. If I'm looking at Henry, if they can make the money work, I think the most logical explanation would be Baltimore, where he's essentially a souped up Gus Edwards. And if Gus Edwards is finding success in Baltimore, and imagine Derrick Henry would be able to as well. And also, we know that these teams with rushing quarterbacks typically have a lower check down rate to their running backs than the guys that are going to be standing in the pocket. So I think Baltimore and Philly would be great landing spots for Henry. Now, going over to Jacob's most likely spot, going to be the Raiders, -110. Outside of that, you have some long shots. The Texans, the Chargers, the Cowboys. Kind of see Jacobs that blend between Derrick Henry and Saquon Barkley. We're younger than both of them, but I don't necessarily know if he's the same talent profile of what you have with Barkley. Now, moving over to the wide receivers, you have Mike Evans essentially penciled in to stay in Tampa. Mike Evans is -165 to be a Tampa Bay Buccaneer this next season, +650 to go to Chicago, +700 to go to New England, +850 to go to Atlanta. I mean, obviously, if Chicago could make the money work, going out there, bringing in Caleb Williams, signing Mike Evans, having Mike Evans line up alongside DJ Moore, those would be two wide receivers that would complement each other very nicely, where DJ Moore is the yards after the catch specialist. Mike Evans pretty much just catches the ball and falls down, but he's very, very good at that. So I don't know. I don't necessarily see how like New England makes sense here, where I would assume that Chicago is much closer to actually contending, at least than I think people give them credit for. While 100% it was a very bad situation 2 years ago, maybe even a year ago, but I don't know, going forward, based off the haul that they got from the Carolina Panthers with that #1 overall trade last season and having the #1 overall pick this year and presumably getting some kind of value for Justin Fields, I do think that this Chicago Bears situation is going to be much better going forward than it has been. So, I mean, out of Chicago or New England, I'd be much more confident in Chicago contending this next year. Now, going over to our next wide receiver, T. Higgins is not priced as if he is going to be a Cincinnati Bengal. He's +150 to be a Bengal, +350 to be a Titan, +550 to be a Panther, and +750 to be a Bear. So essentially, they're coming out and they're saying, T. Higgins is going to chase that bag. T. Higgins wants that mega contract. Obviously, I think we can say that if T. Higgins were to go to a team like the Carolina Panthers, they are going to pay this man an absurd amount of money that maybe Cincinnati's not going to be able to, considering the fact that they have Burrow. They're going to have to extend Chase. So I don't know. I mean, none of these spots outside of Cincinnati would look good for T. Higgins. That's why right now in the underdog drafts, I mean, while Higgins looks like a decent value on paper, I haven't been super excited to draft him just because if he does find himself in Tennessee, if he finds himself in Carolina, if he finds himself in Chicago, probably not a great option unless, of course, Caleb Williams goes 1. Then you have T. Higgins going to play alongside DJ Moore in Chicago, which would just be nuts. But our last wide receiver, you always want to say where there's smoke, there's fire, but this wide receiver just throws up smoke every single day that you never know. Stefon Diggs is someone that a lot of people are worried about his relationship with the Buffalo Bills, but he's -250 to go back to Buffalo. So seeing this, I will tell you, I am going to begin drafting a lot of Stefon Diggs at the 2-3 turn in underdog drafts. This is something that I was a little more concerned about previously, but it looks like really you shouldn't be that worried about Stefon Diggs not being a Bill this next season. Gabe Davis, on the other hand, maybe a different story. But you got New England +600, Chicago +600, Atlanta +1200. I'm assuming he's just going to be a Buffalo Bill. But I think that's all I have for y'all. I really hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please go down there, hit that like button, subscribe. And of course, if you wanted to go get in a draft with us on Underdog, I would say now is by far and away the best time, because if you go over to Underdog Fantasy, use code FLOCK, they're going to match first deposit dollar for dollar up to 100. Plus, you're going to get our Dynasty Fantasy Football rankings. But I think that's all I have for you. You can find that link in the description and comment section. Really hope you have a great day and really hope you get to see you out in the live stream later tomorrow.